When it comes to taking offensive actions, players and DMs often overlook shoving as a worthwhile tactic. But in many scenarios, shoving can lead to higher overall group damage and prevent incoming group damage. For starters, let's quickly cover how shoving works in D&D 5e. Shove is a special attack action used to push a creature on an adjacent tile to the ground or away from the shover. Instead of making an attack roll against the target's AC, a contest occurs between the shover and the target. The creature who is shoving makes an athletics check, which means they roll a d20 and add their athletics modifier, and the target can make an athletics or acrobatics check, target's choice. The shover wins if the result of their check is higher, and then they decide whether to knock the target prone or push it away 5 feet. If the result of the contest is even or the target's result is higher, the shove fails and nothing happens. If the target is knocked prone, the following effects are also applied to the creature. Its only movement option is to crawl, unless it stands up and thereby ends the condition. Every foot of movement while crawling costs 1 extra foot. The creature also has disadvantage on attack rolls, and an attack roll against the creature has advantage if the attacker is within 5 feet of it. Otherwise, the attack roll has disadvantage. That's a quick rundown of how shoving works in 5e. With those basics out of the way, let's get into 10 ways to use a shove action in D&D. Tip number 1 for shoving is to make use of extra attack. If you have extra attack, you can shove a creature to the ground as your first attack to set yourself up with an advantage follow-up attack against a now prone enemy. This is the simplest way to use shove for an immediate offensive advantage for yourself. Plus, depending on the initiative order, your allies may also be able to get some attack rolls in with advantage. My favorite story of this was one of my players, a great axe-wielding paladin, pushed an enemy to his knees before slicing off his head with a divine smite. It was an extra epic end for a corrupt nobleman known for putting the heads of his enemies on pikes outside his walls. A word of warning though, this tactic is less useful and even harmful with a ranged heavy party. That's because attacking prone creatures at range causes the attack roll to have disadvantage. Tip number 2 for shoving in 5e is to pair it with grapple. Grappling a prone creature is incredibly valuable. A grappled creature's speed becomes 0, and standing from the prone condition costs half a creature's movement speed. Therefore, a creature that's suffering from both the prone and grapple conditions is stuck in place, and all melee attacks have advantage against it, while its attacks have disadvantage, until it breaks free of the grapple and gets its movement back at least. Some character builds are built around shoving and grappling really well, and such characters are a welcome addition to any melee-heavy party. As a final note, the contest for grappling is the same as shoving, although it requires a free hand to attempt, so players who are good at one are automatically good at the other. Tip number 3 for the shove action is to shove before running. There are 2 ways that shoving can make your escapes much easier. Method 1 is to shove a target prone so that they'll have to make a disadvantage opportunity attack, and method 2 is shoving a target away to put it out of melee range so that you'll no longer provoke opportunity attacks from moving out of its range, unless it has a reach weapon. Either way, a successful shove makes for a safer escape. Tip number 4 is to push enemies off ledges. If you shove an enemy who doesn't have solid ground behind them or the ability to fly, they're going to take big fall damage. If the fall is 200 feet or higher, you can expect an average of 70 bludgeoning damage on a fall. In a very similar vein, you can use shove to push enemies into harmful terrain. This can either be naturally dangerous spaces like fires, artificial stuff like pit traps, or into the area effect of one of your allies' spells like Spirit Guardians or Web. A 5-foot shove is pretty weak compared to other options like Repelling Eldritch Blast, but sometimes 5 feet is all you need. And tactical tip number 6 for shove is to use Enhance Ability, Enlarge Reduce, Hex, Bestow Course, or Guidance before shoving. Enhance Ability can give you advantage on strength checks, which includes athletics, and therefore shove ability checks. The Enlarge element of Enlarge Reduce will also give you advantage on strength checks and increase the maximum size of your shove targets. Time to go pushing fire giants around. Hex gives an enemy disadvantage on ability checks of your choice. Strength or dexterity would be the relevant choices here, and you'd want to pick the stronger stat so they'll be forced to rely on their weaker one. Bestow Curse can work in much the same way. Guidance gives you plus 1d4 on your next ability check, so I threw it in here, but it's hard to actually use effectively. These spells can all increase your odds of success when attempting to shove a creature. Alright, so those are my tactical tips for using shove in D&D, but I also wanted to include some very basic strategic advice on how to build a character who's good at shoving. Tip number 1 here is to boost your athletics modifier. The simplest way to do this is to pick a class that's already proficient in athletics, or choose a background that gives you athletics proficiency. The other option is picking up the Skill Expert feat to become proficient in athletics and gain expertise in it as well, which doubles your proficiency bonus. It also gives you plus 1 ASI, which you can spend on strength if you want yet another buff to your capacity for shoving. As a bonus, this is a great choice if you're thinking of building a character that relies on both shoving and grappling. Build number 2 is to get the Shield Master feat. This will allow you to shove as a bonus action after you take the attack action on your turn. This means you can't set yourself up with the bonus action shove before attacking, but it's still a great feat for characters who don't have any other use for their bonus action. Your first attack doesn't even need to land to use the shove bonus action, and Shieldmaster also comes with other great defensive perks. Side tip here, don't get the Charger feat. It also allows you to shove as a bonus action, but it's just not a worthwhile feat at all, especially since it lacks a half ASI. Tip number 3 is simple. Be a Barbarian. Barbarian's quintessential class feature, Rage, is the most potent and surefire way to get advantage on strength checks. Most of the powerful shove plus grapple combo builds out there rely on Rage to ensure effective and consistent crowd control. This combination also works as a soft taunt, so the reduction in incoming physical damage is another element of Rage that makes it essential for such builds. But if you're looking for something a little different, you can also be a great shover if you're an open hand monk. Way of the open hand monks can impose extra conditions on the target of their flurry of blows, the 2 unarmed strikes they can use as a bonus action after taking the attack action. 2 of those conditions are nearly the same as shove, but with slightly different mechanics. One forces a dexterity save and knocks the target prone if it fails. This can be a better option than shoving, as proficiency in dex save is less likely than proficiency in acrobatics or athletics. The other option forces a strength save and pushes the creature 15 away if it fails. Again, strength save proficiencies are fairly rare, and a 15-foot push is thrice as far as an ordinary shove. Pretty great for tossing bad guys off cliffs, creating distance for your squishy allies, and forcing enemies into harmful areas. If you like the idea of getting more free shove-like attacks in your rotation, Way of the Open Hand Monk opens up that possibility. Those are just a few tactical tips and character build suggestions for getting the most value out of shoves in 5e. Hopefully I've sold you on the offensive benefits of shoving your target prone to help out the melee members of your party, as well as the defensive perks of being able to create distance and make escapes easier with shoving. Ultimately, shoving's power multiplies when the whole party buys into the strategy, like by shoving enemies into persistent area effect spells like Cloud of Daggers, or buffing the party shover with Enlarge Reduce. I'd also love to hear any stories or tricks you all have for making use of this underrated action. I know there's a lot more to say about character builds that excel at shoving and grappling especially, but I'll leave that type of content to the experts. I left a link to Triot Monk's video on how to optimize grapplers in the video description. I highly recommend watching it if this playstyle sounds like your cup of tea. But for now, let's cover the most common rules questions that come up around shoving in 5e. Rule number 1 is that shoving is attacking. To borrow Jeremy Crawford's line, something is an attack if it involves an attack roll or the rules expressly call it an attack. The rules for shoving expressly call it an attack twice. Using the attack action, you can make a special melee attack, and if you're able to make multiple attacks with the attack action, this attack replaces one of them. As pointed out in a different Sage Advice thread, shoves are just unusual attacks that lack attack rolls. Unless you're talking about the uppercase attack action, which shove ordinarily uses, shove functions as an attack in every semantic and mechanical definition of the term in D&D 5e and common usage. However, shoving doesn't involve an attack roll or a weapon attack, it involves an ability check contest. So if some game effect requires that a creature makes an attack roll or a weapon attack for a trigger to happen, shoving does not satisfy the trigger's condition. Rule number 2 is that you cannot shove as an opportunity attack, because an opportunity attack is a special reaction, while shoving and grappling are especially melee attacks that require the attack action. However, a creature can still use the ready action to prepare a shove attempt as a reaction. Rule number 3 is that shoving does not involve an attack with a weapon or an unarmed strike. This has the immediate implication that you can't replace a 2-weapon fighting attack with a shove, as covered in the Sage Advice Compendium. An implication of this is that you can't use a reach weapon to shove a creature 10 feet away from you, since you are not using your weapon to shove it, and reach weapons only add 5 feet to your reach when you attack with them. However, I will say that Mike Merles contradicted Jeremy in the Sage Advice Compendium on this one, and says he'd allow it with polearms but not whips. My takeaway is that shoving with polearms probably isn't possible if rules is written, but it's up to your DM. Rule number 4 is that the dodge action has no effect on being shoved. The dodge action only gives attackers disadvantage on attack rolls and the user advantage on dexterity saving throws. Since shoving does not involve attack rolls or dexterity saving throws, dodge has no impact on the likelihood of a shove succeeding. Although I will say I've often seen it house ruled that dodging does in fact give the target advantage on their acrobatics or athletics check in the contest, and I myself use this house rule when I DM. Number 5 is that you can shove for multiple attacks per turn with extra attack. If your character has the extra attack feature, they can use shove to replace any and all of their attacks. A 5th level fighter, for example, could attempt shoving creatures twice per turn if they want, or even 3 times per turn at 11th level. Rule number 6 is that ties go to the defender. Because shoves are contests, and because if the contest results in a tie, the situation remains the same as it was before the contest. Since the target was unshoved before the contest, a tie results in the situation remaining the same, and therefore the shove fails. And my last rule reminder is that you can't shove creatures more than one size larger than you. For medium-sized races, that means large creatures are the maximum size shove targets, sans and large. And for small-sized races, medium creatures are the maximum size shove targets. I really overlooked the shove action when I first started playing D&D, and I think a lot of new players do the same. It involves some weird rules, and the benefits seem pretty meh most of the time, especially since you usually have to give up an attack action to use it. And that instinct isn't necessarily incorrect. Shoving isn't an optimal use of a character's full action in many cases. But when a great opportunity for shoving comes up, like pushing a monologuing villain off a balcony, it stands out as especially epic. And teamwork, optimized character build choices, and clever use of your surroundings, shove can become a reliable tool in your party's tactical toolbox. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you found this guide on the shove action helpful and can show your appreciation with a like and subscribe. It's a massive help for small YouTubers like me. If you have any stories about using shove in your own Dungeons & Dragons game, or questions about the spell's rules, please share them in the comments below. This is DnD Lounge wishing you the best of luck in your next adventure.